So, what are the hardest parts of each official Geometry Dash level, including the platformer levels but not including the secret coin paths? In Stereo Madness, the hardest section for most people are the triple spike sections. I'm not sure why 2 triple spikes were added into this level, especially when there are none in the next few levels after this. This makes no sense to include a difficult jump like this in the first level. This should be pushed back by at least a few levels. In Back on Track, the level is quite consistent, so it's hard to find a section that's harder than the rest. But if I were to pick a section, I would say this part towards the end of the level is the hardest. Okay, let's look at Poltergeist. Again, similar to Back on Track, this level is quite consistent and it's hard to pick the most difficult part. However, I believe this section here to be just slightly harder than the rest of the level. In Dryout, a new mechanic is introduced. It's the gravity portal, creating a new challenge for the player, especially if it's the player's first attempt. The rest of the level isn't too bad and it's similar to what the player has already encountered in previous levels, so I would have to say the reverse gravity section of this level is definitely the hardest part. Base After Base and Can't Let Go both have their most challenging sections when the player's gravity is reversed. Especially in Can't Let Go, I do remember being stuck on the reverse gravity section for quite a while before I was actually able to beat the level. Some people find the level jumper easier than Can't Let Go, with myself being one of them. Most of the level isn't any more difficult than the previous level, but anyways, I believe this section here to be the hardest even though it's easier than the hardest section in Can't Let Go. Time Machine for most new players isn't a fun experience with all the triple spikes in the level. I believe the hardest section of this level is between 85 and 95%, especially in that section where you need to jump over 2 triple spikes while your gravity is flipped. In Cycles, there are 2 sections which I think are quite hard. The first section is difficult with the constant gravity switching portals, and then there's this section where the gap for the ball is quite small. However, I think this section with the constant gravity switch change is a lot more difficult, especially considering it's a longer section. Okay, so one of the only parts I died at when recording this video to this point is this section here in X Step. So I'm just going to say that that's the hardest part, and to be honest, I think it is actually the hardest part of this level. Okay, next is the level Clutterfunk. This level has quite a few challenging sections in the level, but more notably this section here in the second half of the level is quite challenging, and is probably the hardest part. However, I do want to mention this section right here, because when I first played this level I struggled a lot with this part, but I'm not sure if I'm the only one. Also, when I was recording this part I accidentally somehow did this. So next we have Theory of Everything, which honestly in my opinion it's easier or at least the same difficulty as Clutterfunk. It doesn't have any really difficult sections that I think stand out from the level, but I think I'll mention this UFO section here just because you need to be a bit careful with your UFO jump timings. Again, Electroman Adventures doesn't have any significantly more difficult sections, except for maybe this transition here which I struggled a lot with when first playing this level. So I think I'll say that this is the most difficult part. Okay, let's look at Club Step. This level has quite a few difficult sections, however, the section I see people struggle with the most is this part right here, with the quick changes of gravity portals being quite difficult leading straight into another mini-ship section, while still having gravity reverse is quite a challenging transition for most players in my opinion. Electrodynamics for some people is even harder than Club Step, and some people consider it to even be a demon level as there are quite some challenging sections in this level. However, all the challenging parts are in the second half of the level, with this section starting at 60% being probably the hardest part. I remember I struggled with this part a lot when trying to beat the level. Okay, Hexagon Force. This level is easier than the previous 2 levels, but it still has a few challenges. Notably this section here, which some people struggle with a lot compared to other people. So I'm not going to say this is the hardest section just because it's just one jump. Instead, I'm going to say this part here is the hardest, with the mini bowl section leading straight into a mini ship section, with these both being quite challenging parts. So blast processing is a lot easier again, with there only being one section I believe could be slightly more challenging for some players that aren't as good with the wave, and that is the dual wave section. Theory of Everything 2. Now this level is harder than the previous levels and has many challenging sections. However, one section that stands out to many players and is the cause of most deaths in this level is this small ship section right here. The next level is Geometrical Dominator. This level has mostly easy sections, however for some reason towards the end of the level there's this one difficult memory section which many players hate and find it to be quite challenging. Alright, so the hardest official level, Deadlocked. This level is notably difficult for its wave sections, with the first main wave part being quite difficult, and then the dual wave into the mini wave towards the end of the level being even more difficult. If you're not good with the wave, this level would be very challenging for you, and will probably take a lot of practice, especially that mini wave section towards the end. The level Finger Dash doesn't have too many difficult sections. However, the first spider section may be challenging for some players if they are experiencing this game mode for the first time. But later on in the level, there's even a harder part. Despite this spider part being very short with only a few jumps, it can be quite challenging because of the increased speed and the short jump timings. And now the final level, Dash, which is quite easier than a lot of the previous levels we just talked about. The level doesn't have any challenging sections and it's a bit hard to find the most difficult part. But in my opinion, I think the end of the level for most people would be the hardest section. However, for some people the swing copter sections might be a little bit harder to them just because it's a new game mode, but as time goes on this section will become very easy as we get used to the new game mode. Okay, now let's look at the platformer levels. The first level of the tower is very easy and it's kind of hard to pick out the most difficult section. But when I've watched other people play this level for the first time, they seem to struggle with this section here the most, so I'm gonna have to say this is the most difficult part. The second level of the tower starts off easy and then goes into this section. At first I found this section quite challenging, especially the second half of this part, which I believe to be the hardest part of the level, and is also what I see most people struggle with the most. The third level of the tower isn't as challenging in my opinion, and finding the most difficult part of this level is quite hard because the level is very consistent. For me at least, this section here was probably the most difficult when I first played the level. The fourth and last level on the first floor of the tower is actually quite fun to play and isn't very challenging until you reach the boss fight. The boss fight for this level at first can be quite challenging for some players, especially if you're a new player, and including myself, I did struggle a little bit with this part. There's also no checkpoints, so it does make this somewhat of a challenging boss fight. So yeah, I would definitely have to say this is the hardest section of this level. Also, I might as well include the challenge level as well. I think the hardest part of this level is the section here, although most of the level is quite consistent and there isn't really any hard parts that stand out from the rest of the level. And that's the hardest part of each official Geometry Dash level. I didn't include the levels from the spin-off games as I wanted to just talk about the levels from the main game. If you have a different opinion on the hardest part of a level, then please leave a comment to let us know. Also, feel free to join the channel as a member for exclusive perks. And please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching.